A Thursday 2 months ago, I stepped into the kitchen and noticed a small puddle of grayish water on the floor. A huge, moist spot of grayness covered the ceiling. I called my landlord straight away. I told her there was a leak and that either a pipe must have burst or some water might have accumulated on the flat roof. She said she would send someone straight away. I asked whether she needed the key. She said no. I suppose that I'm an idiot. I assumed the lack of phone calls during the day was a good sign, and that when I got home, it would all be fixed. I felt some nervousness on the ride home. The bus was slow and my thoughts went a bit overboard. I scolded myself for being ridiculous. Far from ridiculous. From the outside, the bungalow looked fine. I pressed the key in the keyhole, turned it, and pushed the door open. Immediately, an old moldy water stench welcomed me. If you've ever had the pleasure of cleaning an old aquarium thick with algae, you'll know what I'm talking about. The water and debris was already in the corridor. The kitchen looked like an earthquake had struck. Pieces of wood, cement, insulation material, and chipped off paint were all over the floor. The sticky gray water covered not just the center of the room, where the ceiling crashed, but it seemed to have splattered on every single wall and piece of furniture. The old water stench by now had become a pungent smell of rot. Some of the water seemed to have flown in small trickles into every room, and there were small puddles or dried gray stains everywhere. At first, the landlord apologized profusely. Then when the handyman came and told her there was no pipe to fix, she blamed me instead. She said I must have done something to the ceiling. One of the men suggested it might have been rainwater. Rainwater that had trickled through small holes in the roof and collected over an extended period of time in the insulation material of the ceiling. I can understand why my landlord was suspicious that I'd done something. Basically, since the first week of moving in, I complained about the paint that kept chipping off the walls and ceiling. Paint of so many layers that had been painted on top of one another. The bungalow needed a renovation badly, and she knew it, but she didn't want to spend any money on it. The for its condition far overpriced bungalow was her cash cow she wanted to milk until the cow died, or rather, until the falling ceiling killed someone. I only stayed because it was so close to work. For 3 weeks, I had to get up half an hour earlier to make sure I got in the shower before the builders came. In the evenings, I came home to be greeted by a new smell each time. Plastic, plaster, powdered insulation material. It was hard to imagine what the 4 guys were up to during the day. But they didn't just leave smells. They also left trash. Obvious trash that I ended up throwing out because they couldn't do it themselves. I had to live in the mess, eat my cereal between heaps of trash until I threw it out myself. In a way, it was kind of fascinating to see what materials my home was made of. It was kind of fun to guess what each of them were used for. The black sticky rolls were likely for the roof. The yellow fluffy ones, clearly insulation. The wooden planks and drywall plates likely were to be part of my future ceiling. The trash was harder to identify. Of course, there was also the yellow drywall soaked in some gray water and covered in a moldy sludge. I asked the builders 3 times to get rid of it, and in the end did it myself because just the sight of it made me feel sick, not to mention the smell. I pulled the slimy yellow marshmallow-like material into large black bags and put them outside. It was at the bottom of the heap where I found the white bag. I call it a bag because I don't know what better to refer to it as. And it was my first impression that it must be a bag, but the texture was different. It was flexible and strong like a bag, but it also seemed to have structure. A scale pattern was pressed into the material. I fucking hated the builders. I hated that they used my bedroom for their smoke breaks. I hated that they ate my food and particularly my bread during the day. I hated that they left pee on the toilet seat and soiled dirty water all over my apartment. I was happy when they finally finished. The ceiling looked like a patchwork because the landlord felt I was the one who should do the paint job. The kitchen and corridor were a mess, and a few persistent spots of sticky mass were on the kitchen counter and outside the front door. But all in all, I was happy to be on my own again. For 2 days, I lived in the mess. Then the weekend came, and I finally had time to clean up. I spent 4 or 5 hours on cleaning the apartment. I got neither rid of the old smoke, nor of the all-permeating smell of moldy water. Still, after those 4 hours, I sat in my armchair, and for the first time in weeks, maybe even months, I felt relaxed. Truly relaxed. To the core. I fell asleep like that. I woke up at 3 a.m. because the light was still on. I made my way to the bedroom and nearly had a fit of rage. There was water on the floor. Grayish, slightly thick water. The ceiling looked perfectly fine. No holes, no dripping, no wet spots. I wiped it off and checked the walls and floors for any possible leaks. Nothing. By 4:30 a.m., I was finally in my bed. Every night, a few more puddles of the thick water appeared. I told the landlord about it, and the bitch had a go at me that I should be more responsible. At that point, I made the mental decision to move out, but only now, that's only a conscious decision. Only now, that's really a fact. It took me a whole month to overcome my denial. The puddles were always in the same places, at the foot of my bed, right next to my door, and in several places in my kitchen. Mostly the fridge. There weren't any leaks and the air wasn't moist enough to create whole puddles of liquid, and even less to create the grayish liquid. After about a week, I found the common pattern. First, I looked for repeat spots in order to figure out the leaks or the stored liquid in the ceiling. There were the spots I previously mentioned, but still on occasion there were spots in the corridor or near the back door. In the second week, when I knew the repeat spots, I watched the ceiling and surrounding areas closely. Still, There was no sign of any liquid seeping through the cracks of the ceiling, and certainly not enough to form a puddle. During the 3rd week, I gave up on the puddles. I made sure all windows were locked, and I made sure I checked all the suspicious areas for signs of moisture. But honestly, work was exhausting, and I didn't want to think about it at all. I didn't even bother with the puddles unless they got too big. I felt hopeless. The smell had soaked through my clothes, and even at work the smell seemed to come out of my skin as if I myself was the source of the smell. At the end of the 3rd week, the puddles finally stopped. There was nothing more. I wondered probably more why they disappeared than how they came there to begin with. Still, all I felt was relief and happiness, a deep sense of liberation. I slept well again. 6 days in a row, the puddles were gone. That brings us to today. The reason why I'm at a hotel I can't afford. When I woke up this morning, I smelled it right away. It was more pungent than ever before, and in between the smell of stale, rotting water was something else, something fresher, a note like sweat. On my way out of the bedroom, I stared at the huge puddle in disgust. It led straight from the door to my bed and continued behind the door into the kitchen. There was also a branch of thinner spots near the bathroom. I wiped it up straight away. I knew I'd be late for work, but I just didn't want to come home to find more suffocating smells soaked into the cheap floorboards. I started in the bathroom, then to the kitchen to clean up. I had to change the cleaning water twice to get the gray marks off of everything. Finally, I got back to my bedroom. It was the worst out of all of the rooms, and I wondered why I didn't wake up to the sound of the liquid. I had just changed the water for the 3rd time when I realized that the puddle continued under the bed. I pulled the blanket up and pushed my bed towards the far corner. The bed moved. The puddle seemed to have spread even larger under the bed. Suddenly, something white appeared. Something white and thin, like a plastic bag. The wrinkled and ripped textile was soaked with the grayish water. In size and shape, it was only a bit smaller than me. I pushed it around with the mop. A corner pulled off, and I saw a piece of bread. A piece of fresh bread right next to the top of the white bag. It took me nearly a minute to realize where I've seen it before. I recognized it because of the scale pattern. It took only a second for me to realize what it was. Not a bag. A shed skin. You may remember hearing about it on the news, but in July of 2008, there was a string of missing person cases out of the University District in Seattle. 12 people went missing, all of them students at the University of Washington. Their bodies were never found, and no significant evidence was ever recovered. They were all presumed dead, much to the distress of the people who cared about them. Aside from the missing people, though, not much of the case was ever revealed to the public. That's what I'm here to remedy. People have a right to know these things. As of now, the case has gone cold, and all the documents relating to it now sit in the classified file cabinet that SPD employees jovially refer to as the freezer. Investigators had followed several leads, but all of them had arrived at dead ends. They'd quixotically sworn to bring the criminal or criminals to justice. But when all of their attempts at moving the case forward had failed, they'd backed off like frightened kittens, kicked in the gut. The most promising lead, however, had been one that showed itself relatively early in the case's lifespan, around September of the first year. It turned out that all of the abducted students had owned the same Apple computers. This, in of itself, could have been mere coincidence. But further examination by the forensic team showed that every single student had been using proxy servers before the time of their disappearance. For those who don't know, a proxy server is an intermediary web server, often used to keep internet activity as anonymous as possible, disguising IP addresses, which again, for those who don't know, are essentially unique series of numbers given to each computer connected to the internet. With basic knowledge and just a bit of hacking skill, it's possible to find someone's exact location by using their IP address alone. Proxy servers operate with separate IP addresses, usually with locations far away from their users. So, the students were using altered IP addresses. But why? Were they hiding from someone? Proxy servers are, after all, the best way to hide yourself over the internet. As the forensic team continued to garner information from the abducted students' hard drives, more and more similarities were found. Some of them certainly could have been coincidences, but others, there was frankly no way. This is a segment of a report typed up by the computer forensics team, detailing the similarities between the 12 laptops. All computers installed with the web browser Google Chrome. All computers using iTunes, each with approximately 50 gigabytes of music. All computers using proxy servers. All proxy servers appear to have IP addresses based in Iceland. They were all using proxies based in Iceland, which was odd, but the report didn't end there. It continued. All computers have Microsoft Word installed, though there appear to be no documents saved in the documents folders of any of the computers. That's normal enough. Lots of people save their documents in folders on their desktops or on other drives. Desktops on all computers are devoid of files and icons, except for a document that appears in the center of all of them, titled Lita A Bak. The document has no text. This is where it begins to get very strange. Lita A Bak is Icelandic, meaning something like look back or look behind you. It appears the file on the desktop is the only document saved anywhere on all 12 computers. Once is a coincidence. Twice is also a coincidence. But 12 times? The exact same empty document saved in the same place with the same title. It's impossible, but clearly not so impossible that it's, well, impossible. The report continued for a bit after that, but with nothing nearly as significant. When the keyboards were dusted for fingerprints, none of them matched up. There was nothing linking them other than the documents. The forensic specialists were spooked by the findings, but none of them reported any suspicious or paranormal activity afterwards. The Iceland-based proxy servers and documents with titles in Icelandic led investigators to seek other connections between Iceland and the missing students. They went to their parents, probably hoping to find that all the students had relatives in Iceland or something. They needed to solve the case, but of course none of them had any apparent ties to the country. No relatives, no friends, nothing. The investigators had questioned dozens of people, but had found nothing of worth. It was beginning to seem hopeless. That was, until a year later, in July of 2009, when the Iceland National Police in Reykjavik reported a string of missing persons, gone without a trace. This was it. This was what the SPD needed. They eagerly contacted the office in Reykjavik and arranged a meeting, hoping that the cases would somehow match up. Seattle investigators flew overseas, and the information they found was, simply put, terrifying. 12 people in Reykjavik had gone missing, all of them students at the University of Iceland. They all had Apple computers. They all used proxy servers. The proxies' IPs were based in Seattle. They all had Microsoft Word installed, but only one empty document saved on their empty desktops. Can you guess what it was titled? Lita A Bak. When both investigation teams shared their information, things finally looked bright for both cases. This was obviously the work of the same criminal mastermind. It had to have been. They were going to catch whoever or whatever did this. It was all in the name of justice, even when there weren't any bodies to be found, and for all they knew, the missing students could all have been alive and well and peaceful. The rush of optimism ended after a few days when the forensic team in Iceland dusted the computer keyboards, only to find that none of the prints matched. The SPD agents, although disappointed, weren't surprised. Once again, it was hopeless, like so much else. There was still no suspect. There was still no evidence to convict. There was just a bunch of very, very creepy, not so much coincidences. 24 of them to be exact. Nothing more, and certainly nothing less. The leads led nowhere. The search for what happened to the students became a joint investigation between the overseas offices, but there were never any more significant leads. The cases, or just singular case now, had gone stagnant, and after months and months and months of dwindling tenacity, both the SPD and the Iceland National Police finally put the case on the shelf in July of 2012. Cold, frozen, barren tundra. It was over. So much for justice. Since then, both police departments have tried to forget the case. It's become a hollow memory, one no one likes to think about, understandably. And that's all there is to the case, really. I'm writing this now because I'm pretty bored, and I figured it was interesting enough to let you know about. I need to go take a shower now. However, before I go, I'd just like to make sure you realize how difficult it was to brainwash the students by getting them to read my stories. Humans are very perceptive when it comes to things like that. Their meat was worth it, though. Very tender and delicious. But I'm still a bit hungry. Lita A Bak. Let's talk about YouTube. The site was founded in February of 2005 by 3 former PayPal employees by the names of Steve Chen, Chad Hurley, and Jawed Kareem. The 3 were inspired to create a user-friendly and intuitive video file sharing site when they were having difficulty sharing a video of a dinner party at Chen's apartment. The first video to ever be uploaded to the site was put up on April 3, 2005 at 8:27 p.m. under the name Me at the Zoo. It's 19 seconds long and features Kareem talking about the elephant display at a local zoo. As of the writing of this text, it has over 8.7 million views. In May 2005, YouTube opened up for public beta testing, and 6 months later, in November of 2005, YouTube officially launched. From its first public beta to its official launch to now, YouTube has found itself hosting billions of videos, with hundreds of thousands being uploaded each day. It's grown into the single most popular video sharing site ever and is among the top 5 most popular websites on the entire internet. Most of the videos people watch on YouTube have showed up on the front page of the site with at least a couple 100,000 views or more. Most of the videos you personally have watched probably had anywhere between 500 and 1,000 views. Rarely does anyone find themselves lurking around in the darker, more obscure corners of YouTube, crawling with the videos that have less than a dozen views. But of course that place exists. Not every video among those billions is going to get much attention, and I've always thought there's something special about being a part of a view count that you can number on one hand. You watch a video with 5 views, and you're among a select few that have ever witnessed whatever was filmed. Unfortunately, more often than not, it's something stupid and not worth watching, which accounts for the low views. Nowadays, the site is very heavily moderated, and not even the most obscure video can pop up with nudity in it without being deleted immediately. But how about we wind the clocks back 7 years? On November 21st, 2005, not long after YouTube's official launch, a particular YouTube account was opened under the rather unspectacular name of Dennis100. 3 days later, on Thanksgiving, Dennis100's first video was uploaded with the name Talking Turkey. The video, recorded on a low-quality camcorder, featured a family sitting at a kitchen table picking apart a cooked turkey and eating it. It appears to be a recording of an average Thanksgiving meal, except all the audio in the recording is replaced with a man loudly screaming in an attempt to appear as though the turkey is screaming in pain as the family eats it. Near the end of the recording, the camera turns towards the small prepubescent girl sitting at the table and zooms in on her face. The video fades to black shortly after the girl begins to cough violently and then appears to start gagging. Throughout the entire video, a small pink watermark lingers in the corner reading, skippersbin.com. The description of the video was merely for Skipper. The video itself received less than 10 views and no comments. Despite its appearance in the video's watermark, no domain has ever been registered under the name skippersbin.com. A mere day later, another video was uploaded to the account named Talking Turkey Behind the Scenes, with the same poor spelling and grammatical mistakes. The video is shakily filmed with another cheap camcorder, shot from behind the one that filmed the first video, which is mounted on a tripod. In the video, you can see two Caucasian individuals standing behind the tripod-mounted camera, dressed in jeans and dirty plain white t-shirts. What's particularly strange, though, is that one is wearing a rubber gorilla mask and the other is wearing a plastic cartoonish Dracula mask. Both persons are watching the family eat the turkey and softly laughing to themselves. The video films the entire length of the first, with the man in the Dracula mask grabbing the tripod-mounted camera and panning it over to the little girl. Just as the small girl begins to cough and gag, the cameraman lifts a bottle of soap into the shot. He then lunges the bottle at the father, who falls over after the impact. While the rest of the family offers no reaction besides simultaneously gagging just like the girl, the three men behind the camera begin laughing hysterically before the video abruptly cuts to black for around 3 seconds and then just ends. Just like the first video and every video uploaded to the account, this one shares the same skippersbin.com watermark and an identical description, as well as a similarly low view count. However, unlike the Talking Turkey video, this one received one comment from username Bogbox, reading,
"Lol, good times."
The Bogbox account was created one day after Dennis 100, and it had uploaded a single video entitled, "Open Up Skipper's Bin," which is nothing more than 20 seconds of black text on a pink background displaying the name non-existent URL as shown in Dennis 100's 2 videos. Dennis 100 did not upload any further videos until December 12th, at which point a new video with the title "Everybody's a Critic" was posted. In the video, a balding middle-aged man in a stained wife beater is seen hopping up and down rhythmically in a dimly lit garage. The camera is zoomed in very close to the man, and despite the low visual quality, the viewer can see the man is very badly bruised on his face and has several scars across his forehead. The sound of glass shattering can be heard from below, and around a minute into the video, the camera zooms out, revealing the 2 men in the gorilla and Dracula masks from the previous video pulling glass bottles out of a crate sitting beside them and throwing them at the man's bare feet, causing him to dance. Throughout this first minute and 30 seconds of the video, generic disco music is playing over the audio as you watch the man dance pathetically on shards of broken glass with blood smearing on the floor. Then, the music abruptly cuts out, and a third man walks into frame wearing a brown paper bag on his head with 2 makeshift eye holes cut out and a smile haphazardly scribbled onto it with a black marker. The paper bag man begins to scream into the ear of the dancing men, shouting expletives and insults at the man, as well as harshly criticizing his dancing. Throughout this, the dancing man begins to cry. The paper bag man then turns to the camera and shouts, "Can you believe this?" and points his thumb at the dancing man, who does a sort of ballerina twirl and collapses onto the floor. Then the video fades to black. What's interesting about this particular video is that, being the first time any of the men talk, one can detect a very vague and indistinct Eastern European accent from the paper bag man. Seems like a lot of the weird stuff on the internet originates from that area, doesn't it? 10 days later, on December 22nd, Dennis100 uploaded a fourth video entitled "Having Too Much Fun," which is filmed from within a child's bedroom. The camera is set down on a dresser and is filming the paper bag man jumping up and down on a bed. Off to the side, barely in frame, the gorilla man is ramming a crippled teenage boy in a wheelchair over and over again into the wall. The kid is crying while this happens, and the gorilla man is laughing loudly and continuously gets rougher and more vicious each time he does it. While the Dracula man does not appear in this video, off in another room, you can vaguely hear the repetitive creaking off a bed, as well as feminine screaming and sobbing. This goes on for around 2 minutes and 15 seconds before the creaking in the other room stops and a loud thud is heard. At this point, both the gorilla man and the paper bag man stop what they're doing, and the paper bag man yells out,
"Are you done in there?"
which is replied to with a muffled,
"Yeah."
The paper bag man then hops off of the bed, grabs the camera, and the video ends as someone off camera mutters,
"That was quick."
The video received another comment from Bogbox reading,
"Best night ever. Thank you, Skipper."
Another month of inactivity went by before Dennis100 uploaded his fifth and final video on January 14th, 2006. This one, titled "Bad Luck Lewis," shows a dazed man sitting at a small plastic table, likely one meant for small children, in the middle of what appears to be the corner of a much larger warehouse. Behind the camera, he asks what his name is, and he mumbles the response in a tired tone, "Lewis." He is then asked for a few more questions which, along with their answers, are incomprehensible and cannot be heard over the sound of the Dracula man walking into frame with a tape recorder that is continuously playing a voice that repeats,
"7 years bad luck,"
over and over again. The interview between the cameraman and Lewis goes on under the loud recording that Dracula man is playing for around 5 minutes. During the entire length of the interview, Lewis appears to occasionally drift off to sleep. After the 5-minute mark, the gorilla man quickly runs into frame and smashes a mirror over Lewis's head, and he collapses immediately onto the table. The Dracula man then grabs the shreds broken off the mirror and begins frantically stabbing himself in the stomach with them and screaming,
"7 years bad luck,"
while the gorilla man and paper bag man laugh hysterically. The video then abruptly ends about 10 seconds later. That was Dennis100's last video. All of his 5 uploaded videos never got over 15 views. His account, along with Bogbox's, have both since been deleted and the videos lost. The website skippersbin.com neither then nor now has ever existed, and who Skipper is, I don't know. I can't claim to be capable of leaving you with any more knowledge about these videos than when you began reading. If you wanted to see them, I'm sure you could find downloads of one of them deep in the bowels of some obscure file sharing site that you shouldn't be downloading anything from to begin with. But I doubt you'll ever find them. If you'd like to know the point of this story is, there isn't really much of one. Just thought I'd inform you of what's been happening in the darker, more obscure corners of YouTube. Crawling with the videos that have less than a dozen views. I grew up in a tiny town in Vermont. Tiny in terms of population, not size. There were huge sprawling farms and wooded areas, but almost no people. More cows than people, which is standard for a lot of small towns in Vermont. So clearly, not the most fun in the world for a kid who is sick of freezing winters and awful balmy summers surrounded by boring Vermonters that didn't have many kids my age. My only close friend was Tina, who is only a year older than I was. We spent almost all our time together, constantly dreaming about life outside of Vermont. The people in our town were strange folk. Different than in other places. One thing I didn't realize about small towns until I moved to the city is how incredibly superstitious people in towns like mine could be. They believed in the strange, the paranormal. They believed in Luvia. Luvia was an older Canadian French woman who had moved to Vermont when she met her husband. And everyone in town thought she was clairvoyant, psychic. Even my own parents did. One day, my mother lost her wedding ring. She'd look everywhere for it, and they called Luvia, and she immediately told them it was under old rotting wood. They looked in the backyard where my father had been tearing apart a decaying piano he'd found. My mother had helped him one day. The ring was there, under old rotting wood. After hearing a lot about Luvia from older townsfolk who seemed to think she was 100% credible, Tina and I decided to go see her one evening to try to find out whatever she could tell us about the future. I was skeptical, but it seemed like a fun thing to do as a joke. So, we dropped by her house in the early evening, and she opened the door as we walked up to the pathway to her house, before we even had the chance to knock. Tina elbowed me hard in the ribs and whispered that Luvia was clearly a psychic. She sensed us coming to the door. I whispered back that it probably had more to do with her house being full of windows, and the fact that she probably saw us coming from a long way away. Either way, I started to feel strange the minute we got close to her. She was very, very old, very tiny, and kind of sunken. Sunken eye sockets and sharp cheekbones and a sort of concave chest cavity. It was more than a little unnerving, but she smiled and was sweet to us, and I started to warm up to her. Nothing about her or her house screamed creepy psychic to me. Just a well-dressed older woman in a cabin-style house. It looked like you'd imagine any typical grandmother's home. Doilies, knitting, family magazines, etc. We told her that we were interested in a clairvoyant reading, and handed her about $20 that we had scrounged together between the two of us. She led us to her kitchen table and asked which of us wanted to go first. "What can you tell me about my love life?" Tina asked. Luvia had no crystal ball, tarot cards, or tea leaves. She just closed her eyes and sat silently for about 2 minutes. Then she took a deep breath and said, "Michael Carton." Tina stared at her for a few seconds until Luvia repeated, "Michael Carton, the man you're going to marry. Michael Carton." Tina thanked her and repeated the name to herself a few times. Michael Carton, Michael Carton, Michael Carton. Luvia then turned to me. "Whatever you can tell me, I'd like to hear," I said. "It doesn't have to be about my love life or anything." Luvia closed her eyes for a few seconds, but information about me seemed to reach her much quicker than our visions of Tina's husband. She looked straight into my eyes, grabbed my hands, and said, "The thing that will kill you is shedding its skin. The thing that will kill you is sharpening its teeth. The thing that will kill you is washing the blood off of its claws. The thing that will kill you is gathering skins. The thing that will kill you, you won't see it coming." The three of us sat there in silence for quite a while. I felt sick, shaken up. Luvia looked as if she wished she didn't have to tell me that. Is there anything I can do to stop it?" I asked. Luvia slid our money back across the table to us. "No charge for the reading." Tina and I slunk out of Luvia's house quietly. We didn't say a word on the way back to our houses. Tina just found out the name of the love of her life, and I got to listen to a horrifying cryptic message about my death. I was 12 years old and fucking terrified. When Tina left me at my doorstep, she tried to make light of the readings. "How does she know who I'm going to marry?" she asked. "And it's not like some monster's gonna get you. Some skin-shedding, bloody sharp. It's not like some monster's gonna get you. It's not like some monster isn't going to get you." For years I looked for it. The thing that will kill me. I could almost feel it. Sensed it just behind each car, swaying behind the trees at night, underneath the fresh snow, waiting outside my window. With every step, I hesitated. Every time I tried to sleep, I could almost see it. What had she said about its teeth? I looked out for sloughed skin, for blood, for skin, for hides. But I never found it. When I was 18, I left for college in California to get far away from the snow and the cold and the thing that will kill me. I stopped sensing it everywhere. My heart stopped pounding whenever I walked alone at night. Maybe, whatever it was, it stayed in Vermont. Maybe it wasn't a thing at all. People in California laughed when I told them the story, and it stopped seeming real. Just the ramblings of a tiny, ancient Canadian French woman. It wasn't real. When I was 27, a wedding invitation came in the mail. Tina was getting married. This was the first I had heard of it. I was still in California and barely kept in contact with anyone from back east. It seemed like a past life. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Michael Carton and Tina." Wait, no. Clearly she had the name in her mind, Michael Carton, and she sought him out. It had nothing to do with Luvia. Her predictions weren't real. They couldn't be. Clairvoyants don't exist. It's ridiculous to think that this kind of thing happens in the real world, right? I went to the wedding. Tina, Michael, and I laughed about the whole thing. The psychic knew. She predicted it. Of course she didn't. Tina and Michael decided it was nothing more than a funny story to tell their future children.
Just tell us if you run into some beast with razor-sharp teeth that's gathering skins, okay? Then we'll think it's more than just a funny coincidence.
I left the wedding as sure as ever that the thing that will kill me wasn't real, didn't exist. I looked behind the trees, the cars. Nothing was waiting for me. Nothing was ready to skin me. I didn't know why I'd been scared so long. The best thing about Tina's wedding was that we got back in touch for the first time in a very long time. We were very different people than we had been as children, but we still shared more of a bond than we realized. She was happy living in Vermont with Michael. She told me everything that was going on in our town. The population slowly increasing, the new schools built, the babies that were born, Luvia dying. As the years went on, her calls and emails got less and less frequent. She always seemed to be busy. Soon, they tapered off completely. I missed her, of course, but I had my own life, and I could check in on my childhood home whenever I wanted. One winter, I came into town to visit my parents for the holidays, and decided I'd swing by Tina's house. I'd normally never just drop by, but she was pretty bad about answering her phone, and I really wanted to see her. I pulled up to her and Michael's house. 2 cars were in the driveway, so I figured they were both home. I walked up and rang the doorbell. Michael opened it, dressed in several layers and a large coat, as if he had just come in from the snow. He invited me inside. He looked very surprised to see me, and asked if I had talked to Tina recently. I haven't, actually. Not in several months. Sorry for the invasion. I don't usually just drop by like this, but I was wondering if I could see her.
I figured you'd know. That you'd have heard. She left me a few months ago. Just up and left. Hasn't spoken to me since.
Oh God, I said. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. He took off his coat and hung it on a coat rack by the door.
Can I take your coat?
He asked. I told him it was all right, that I wouldn't be staying long. I was just so shocked she'd do something like that. He was a really good guy.
Sorry. I was about ready to get to bed. Got an early work day tomorrow. You mind?
He kicked off his shoes, pulled his sweater off, and headed towards his bathroom. I settled in, looked around their home. Of course I don't mind. You know where she went?
I don't.
He yelled from the bathroom, mouthful of toothpaste.
She didn't call until after she was gone.
That's awful. I'm sorry. He started flossing, and when he saw me looking toward him, he closed his door for privacy. When I heard the shower water start running, I pulled out my phone, figuring I'd take this time to look through Tina's last messages to me, to see if she gave any hint to where she went, any clue. My phone fell out of my hand as if I grabbed it out of my bag, and I saw it drop beneath the couch. As I felt around under the couch for my phone, my hand hit something else. A massive clump of long hair. I pulled it out from beneath the couch. It seemed so strange. Such a large mass of hair. Brown hair. Tina's shade. Hair with a piece of scalp still attached. The thing that will kill you is gathering skins. I turned towards the bathroom door. Michael was still showering. The thing that will kill you is washing the blood off of its claws. He was flossing and brushing his teeth. The thing that will kill you is sharpening its teeth, slowing off his outer clothes and his shoes. The thing that will kill you is shedding its skin. Oh God, the thing that will kill me. I heard the water in the shower stop, movements from inside the bathroom. I ran out the door, slammed the door, sprinted to my car, shaking, watching the door. My hands fumbled with keys, shaking and shaking. The door to the house opened. My car started. I drove. I didn't look back. I drove. All through the night. Through most of the next day, only stopping when I absolutely had to. I had no idea if he was following me. I had no idea what I'd just seen. My heart didn't start beating normally again until I was 2 states away. I went home. This was months ago. I called the police. They investigated, and nothing turned up. They're sure she had just left him, moved away. Maybe she did. Maybe she's far away, safe. Maybe nothing's coming for me. Maybe Michael is just a poor guy whose wife left him. Maybe it's nothing behind the trees, in the snowdrifts underneath the cars, outside my door at night, and the windows. Maybe it's nothing. Probably it's nothing. Luvia's been wrong before, hasn't she? The thing that will kill you. You won't see it coming. I was adopted. I never knew my real mother. Rather, I knew her at one time, but I left her side when I was too little to be able to remember. I love my adopted family, though. They were so kind to me. I ate well, lived in a warm, comfortable house, and I got to stay up pretty late. Let me tell you about my family real fast. First, there's my mother. I never called her Mom or anything like that. I just called her by her first name, Janice. She didn't mind at all, though. I called her that for so long, I don't think she even noticed. Anyhow, she was a very kind woman. She was the one who recommended my adoption in the first place. Sometimes I would lay my head against her in front of the television and she would tickle my back with her nails. She was one of those Hollywood mothers. Second, there's Dad. His real name was Richard, but he never really liked me much, so I began to refer to him as Dad in a desperate attempt to gain his affection. It didn't work. I think no matter what I called him, he would never love me as much as his own child. That's understandable, so I really didn't press the matter. The most notable attribute of Dad was his unmoving sternness. He was not afraid to pop his children when they did something wrong. I found that out before I could use the restroom properly. He didn't hesitate to spank me. Well, I'm in line, and it's because of his methods. And finally is my sister. Little Emily was really young when I was adopted, so we were about the same age, but she was slightly older. I like to think of her as my little sister, though. We got along better than any sibling could possibly get along. We would always stay up late together and just talk. Well, she did a lot of the talking. I mostly just listened because I loved her. It was a great setup that we had. We were short on bedrooms, though. So, because I didn't want to sleep in the living room by myself when I was little, I had a pallet set up for me next to her bed on the floor. This is where I slept since. But it was cool with me because I enjoyed being with her and I had always felt pretty protective of my little sis. Everything changed on a horrible Wednesday night. I was at home taking a nap when little Emily opened the front door. The sound of the door opening pulled me to a state of consciousness, and I walked from the room down the hall to the living room. It's when I first remembered it was Wednesday. I was never any good at keeping track of what day it was. Actually, I'll just go ahead and say it. My sense of time was horrible. But nevertheless, I knew it was Wednesday because Emily had just come home from her church's youth group gathering. She walked in the door and hugged me, and then was followed in by Dad and Janice. "You have a good nap?" Janice said teasingly as she ruffled up my hair. I just shook my head away and snorted in a manner that clearly expressed that I was teasing back with her.
"Don't you snort at your mother like that,"
said my father gruffly with authority. He shut the door behind him and hung up his coat. I was clearly joking, I growled under my breath. He must have not heard me because I didn't feel him smack me. Emily then proceeded to our room and I followed. She started telling me about her day. You know, usual teenage girl stuff. But I listened, so that she would feel better. After her summary, she suggested watching TV and I obliged and jumped onto the couch as she was going for the remote. She rolled her eyes at my little brother-like immaturity and scooted me over and sat down. The TV turned on and we watched it together until the sun went down. Emily was the kind of girl that, instead of watching cartoons and soap operas, would rather watch Discovery and Animal Planet and Natural Geographic. I like those too, so I didn't mind. Actually, those were the only channels that can hold my attention. So it got late, and Janice walked up behind the sofa. "Emily, it's past your bedtime. Turn off the television and go to your room." "You too." She pointed at me. Emily turned off the program we were watching grudgingly and stood up. She started down the hallway to our room. As I followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. We went into our room, and Emily turned off the light. Just as she did, I caught a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye. It was out the window, but as soon as I redirected my line of sight to where the window was no longer in my peripheral vision, what it was that I thought I saw was gone. I still remained alert for my sister's sake. I lay there in the darkness with nothing but the thin ray of light from the street lamp outside to illuminate the room. It wasn't much. Time and time again, I could have sworn that I heard subtle sounds just out the window. A twig break, leaves crunching, clothes jostling, and all the while I could smell a faint stench of sweat and blood. I kept my eyes open most of the night. The sounds outside subsided, and the smell left my nose. I began to feel at ease. My eyelids closed. Not long after that, I heard a very loud crash on the other side of the house. I was up in an instant. "There's someone in the house!" I barked with extreme adrenaline coursing through me. "Wake up!" I shrilly pleaded with Emily. She did, and as soon as I saw her sit up, I ran to my parents' room. Dad was dead. His neck was splayed open and gaping as blood spilled out of it, off the bed and onto the floor. I saw that the master bathroom's door was closed, and just before it on the outside was a man. A man. I don't feel comfortable calling it that. He was very large and rugged. He turned around and saw me, and that's when I saw him accurately for the first time. I won't forget it. His eyes were large and beady and trapped with lust. He was styling a beard that was badly unkempt, with blood dripping off. His clothes were dirty and his face was cold. Just then, I noticed the same horrid smell of sweat and blood from earlier, but this time it was overwhelming. He saw me. He saw me and grinned with a set of crooked yellow teeth. That smile threw me off. I thought that I was going to die. But then he turned back to the bathroom door completely unperturbed by my presence. I was terrified and didn't know what to do. I just yelled and cried. I watched as he shouldered through the door that was my mom's only protection. I watched as he raised the large razor that he was carrying, but had obviously neglected to use properly. I watched as he sliced her open and tore her to shreds. I then heard something, the last thing I wanted to hear. It was Emily's scream coming from behind me. The large monstrosity looked up from my butchered mother and stared at my little sister. I was distraught. He stood up and quickly started walking towards us. My sis turned and ran, and I was at a loss when he bypassed me and went straight after her. Why was she still in the house? Did she not assess the situation and run? Apparently not. And now she was dead, and I was alone. I ran after them both. I expected the man to kill her as he had the rest of my family. But I was sadly mistaken. He grabbed her by the arm and jerked her as a way to make clear that he was in control. He dragged her through the house. I was making all the noise I could now, hoping and praying that someone would come to my aid. You mustn't take her, not her. As he passed me, I backed against the wall and whimpered with terror. Why? He didn't respond except by putting his free hand on my head while Emily screamed in the other and saying,
Good boy.
He gave another crooked grin and a very cold, unnatural laugh. I followed him to the door where he dragged my helpless sister after him. He opened it, pulled her out, and slammed it shut behind him. I'm now sitting in the house with my mutilated adopted parents, shivering and whimpering with dismay. He's out there with her, doing who knows what to her, and I can't do anything. I would if I could, but I can't. I would chase after them in a heartbeat, but I can't. I sit here looking at the front door. I look down at my paws. If only I could open doors. What you're about to hear actually happened while on an internship during the fall of 2014. In order to protect people's privacy, I'm not including the names of my friends, the name of the company I was employed with at the time, or the name of my university. But after you read my account, if you feel skeptical or otherwise have any questions about my experience, feel free to email me at 245-3396381@qq.com. I know the address looks like a spam email, but QQ is actually an extremely popular social networking site in mainland China, as Facebook, Twitter, and all the Western networks are blocked by the Chinese government. The reason for the suspicious username is that your QQ number is randomly generated and assigned to you when creating an account. That's right. Your identity is literally reduced to an itemized number until you provide personal details on your account. Anyways, in the fall of 2014, I got a job as a supervisor over 13 volunteer English teachers. I would be working in a Chinese city called Weihai, located in Shandong province. The company that hired me sends English teachers to Mexico, India, China, Russia, and Ukraine each semester. I was super excited at the opportunity because not only would I have the chance to live in China again, I had originally been one of the volunteers for this same program several years prior. But my university was willing to grant me a semester's worth of Chinese language credits as an academic internship. I could get good job experience, live abroad in a country that I consider my second home, and complete a semester of school. It was my dream semester. In Weihai, the volunteers and I lived and worked at a prestigious international private school. They treated us really well. One of the biggest perks being that in addition to taking the same vacation days as the school's faculty that took place over China's national holidays, we also got an extra week or two of personal vacation time. It was during one of these vacations that I had one of the most disturbing experiences of my life. Two of my buddies from our group, I'll call them Sarah and David, decided they wanted to travel down south to China's Guangdong province during the Dragon Boast Festival. I suggested that we visit Yangshuo, a little-known village surrounded on all sides by the region's gorgeous mountains. I had visited it a year before and wasn't about to pass up an opportunity to visit there again. Search Google images of Yangshuo's scenery, and you'll understand why I'm so crazy about the place. Yangshuo isn't a large town, but even so, if you plan to do everything that you want to while you're there, you'll need transportation since most of the things to do are out in the countryside. The problem with that, we'd chosen a super busy time of year to visit such a popular tourist location. All the traffic in the area the entire 6 days we were there was literally a continuous traffic jam, so taking cabs or hiring rickshaws wasn't an option. We were fine enough though, as we'd rented some bikes which gave us the freedom to go anywhere we wanted. It actually worked out even better than relying on cabs, because we would be able to get to some of the places that were out of the way and inaccessible by car. I remembered some mud caves pretty deep in the countryside that I'd visited before. It was about an hour outside of town by bike, so it was more than a little out of the way, but its secluded nature was one of the reasons it was such an appealing destination, especially during such a busy holiday where it was nice to have a break from all the tourists. I convinced Sarah and David to make the trip to these mud caves, explaining how we'd already done everything there is to do immediately around the city. They reluctantly agreed, and the morning of the 5th day, we grabbed our bikes and headed out. We rode for an hour and a half, 2 hours. After the 2-hour mark, I realized that I must have gotten us lost. Granted, it had been quite a while since I'd last been there, so I think it's understandable that I didn't remember the route. Regardless, I felt stupid and guilty because I talked up the mud cave so much to my friends, and it looked like we weren't even going to make it to them. Not only that, we seemed to be in a completely isolated section of countryside. I spoke the language, so finding our way back to town wasn't going to be a problem, provided we found another person. From what it looked like, we were in the middle of the wilderness, and I was worried that I'd inadvertently wasted one of the last days of our vacation. I explained the situation to my friends, who groaned and were noticeably annoyed at me, but who, to their credit, didn't complain or even blame me for ruining their vacation. That actually made me feel even worse about my screw-up. This was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and I knew that losing a vacation day was no small matter to them. We stopped our bikes and began discussing what we should do. Should we continue following the current trail and maybe find someone further along the way? Or should we try to backtrack and run into someone closer to the main road? Should we just abandon our original plan and try to find something else to do out in the country? While we were deciding what course of action we should take, I noticed some old-looking buildings hidden within a valley, obscured by the thick vegetation clinging to the steep mountain slopes. I was elated, There was bound to be some people in or around those buildings, and it couldn't have been more than a 15-minute ride from where we currently were. Aside from which, some of the more memorable places in China are the ones that you stumble upon by accident, the ones that aren't known as big touristy places. Our bad luck could turn out to be a good thing after all. It was evident as we rode our bikes into the enclave that it had been abandoned for some time. The buildings were obviously once part of an old commune from the Maoist era when communism was in full swing, and everyone was required to live in communal compounds. After Mao's death, Deng Xiaoping started on economic reforms to move China away from communism. People deserted these communes to make a life in the city and chase a capitalistic dream. So what we stumbled upon was actually a really cool piece of Chinese history. We decided to check it out, look around, take some pictures, etc. The entire compound was an enormous Sihayuan, which is essentially a house contained in the walls, surrounding a large courtyard that usually doesn't contain smaller structures. Again, you can Google it for a better idea of what it looks like. In this case, though, it wasn't just a single household. It was an entire walled community. The walls themselves comprised the living quarters, the central area contained an overgrown field where they would have kept the publicly owned livestock, etc. It looked like some animals had taken up residence since the people left. Some goats and cows grazed the long grass, and chickens clucked around their feet. Scattered around the perimeter of the field were a few rundown buildings dotting the compound, which I assume at one point were the dining hall and some small for textile mills or small-time industrial production plants, depending on what this place specialized in. We checked around the living area, and it was immediately clear that this place had been abandoned for several decades. The rooms were almost completely vacant, only furniture and a few odd assortments of possessions, woks, chopsticks, portraits of Mao were left behind, creating sort of a gloomy atmosphere amid the cracked, crumpling walls. We snapped some pictures, recorded some videos, and just generally took in the scenery. We were getting ready to leave when I heard a voice coming from the far end of the commune. Was somebody still living here? It was possible. We had seen some animals left in the central area after all. I'd assumed that they were wild, but it made sense that somebody was still raising them. In fact, it probably made more sense because it didn't seem very likely that stray animals would find their way inside a gated community like this. We approached the apartment where the voice was coming from. The front door was slightly ajar, and the rich smell of incest wafted out. The voice continued droning on, almost like a chant. David spoke up.
You think this guy knows the way back to Yangshuo? You should ask for directions.
I thought maybe the person inside was performing some kind of religious ceremony, so I was reluctant to interrupt him, and I said as much. We don't know how long they're gonna take in there. You seriously just want to wait outside the door for a couple hours like a bunch of creepers? Just knock on the door, and if what they think they're doing is really important, then they'll ask us to wait and give us directions when they're done. I was a little bit annoyed by that because David had a tendency to use our celebrity status as white people to expect special treatment from Chinese nationals. I preferred to try and blend in with the culture as much as I could, but I have a strong respect for local customs, particularly religious ones. He also had a point. Chinese people are naturally hospitable and eager to help others. If this person was a devout Buddhist or Taoist, then their willingness to help us would be even greater and would most likely drop whatever they were doing the second they saw us. So I rapped lightly on the door. There was no response. I knocked a bit louder, and the person continued mumbling to themselves. I opened the door slightly and called out to them to alert them of our presence. "Wei, ni hao." Then the chanting stopped for a moment, almost imperceptibly, but then continued as though nothing happened. I pushed the door open all the way and saw an elderly hunchback man wandering about the room, shaking a wooden tool as he hobbled about, mumbling his incantation. He was certainly a communist-era comrade. His hunched posture and wrinkled yet calloused skin told of years of hard work. He was practically doubled over at the waist and only had a few wispy white hairs on the top of his head. His clothes were the classical communist fare: dark gray pants with a matching button-up shirt that reached his Adam's apple, along with a squared-off cap. He must have taken great care of his clothing, because they were in surprisingly good shape, considering that they were from around the 50s. It's not like anyone could find a replacement for era-specific clothing 60 years after the fact. Even more surprising than his physical appearance, however, was the state of his apartment. Given how empty the rest of the rooms were in this commune, I was shocked at how decorated this one was. It looked as though he'd scavenged everything his neighbors had left behind when they left. None of the walls were accessible because tables had been pushed up against them, occupying every inch of the room's perimeter. The tabletops were completely covered by candles, statues of miniature Buddhas in various poses, wilted flowers, beaded bracelets, and necklaces, the shoes of infants, calligraphy drawn carefully on rice paper, and what looked like the personal effect of loved ones who had either passed away or abandoned him. There looked to be thousands of other items that I couldn't even begin to identify. I approached him and began to speak, asking if he was familiar with Yang Shuo and if he would be able to help us find our way back to the main road. In response, he only muttered a short phrase.
Washaw Sigaran.
Washaw Sigaran? I'm short for people? Was this person expecting company? Excuse me? I asked in Putonghua Mandarin.
Washaw Sigaran,
he repeated again, urgently. He glanced at me, and then his eyes darted to Sarah and David. He looked between the three of us, repeating this phrase over and over. I felt bad. This poor man must have been senile. Maybe his friends or family had left the commune and promised to come back and he was still awaiting their return. Or maybe he was just pretty far gone and honestly believed he was preparing to receive 4 guests who hadn't yet arrived. I tried communicating with him a few more times, but he simply continued mumbling this cryptic phrase, shaking the wooden object in his hand. I took a closer look and realized I'd seen the object he was holding before. It was a religious instrument used for venerating statues of Buddha, similar to how Catholics believe that partaking of the Eucharist purifies members of their sins. Buddhists use tools like the one this man was shaking to sprinkle statues of Buddha with water, symbolically cleansing themselves. They were shaped like Spanish maracas and were riddled with tiny holes that would allow for a several of water to escape from each hole with each shake. Sometimes people would infuse the water with lavender or other herbs to invoke a pleasant smell. I don't know what this man had mixed in with the water, but it was pretty putrid. I ignored it and turned back to Sarah and David. "What's he saying?" Sarah asked. "He just keeps saying, 'I'm missing 4 people,' I replied. "What does that mean?" Honestly, I have no clue, but I have a feeling he's not going to be able to help us. Should we just try and head back to the main road, and hopefully we'll run into someone there who can give us directions?
What the hell?
David yelled. Sarah and I spun to look at him.
That old guy just soaked me.
He complained, motioning to a wet spot on his shirt. I rolled my eyes. Give him a break, I said. He obviously doesn't know what he's doing. As I said this, the elderly man continued to shuffle around the room, sprinkling water on the statues of Buddha and the other artifacts laid out on the tables, all the while muttering,
Wash your cigarette. Wash your cigarette.
I'm fine with just going, but you should at least ask him if he has any water. My bottle's completely empty, Sarah said. It was a good idea to get a refill before we left. Yangshua is ridiculously humid and hot year-round, so even though it was already late October, it felt like mid-July in Florida. We were so sweaty that we could easily get dehydrated by just standing around, even without riding bikes. Yeah, that's a good idea, I responded. I was about to turn to the man for one last attempt at communication to hopefully find out where we could get some water. He violently shook the maraca-like tool, drizzling water on my shoes and the floor around my feet. Some even splashed up on the pant legs of my shorts.
Wash your cigarette,
he muttered again, but this time it caused a chill to run through me. Something didn't feel right. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something was wrong.
Wash your cigarette.
I took a step towards the man and felt my foot slide slightly. It touched the floor. I looked down and saw the unnatural layer of gray dust that had collected on the floor. How could there be so much dust on the floor if someone lived here?
Wash your cigarette.
I was getting increasingly uncomfortable and felt the urge to leave, but I couldn't understand why. I glanced over to Sarah, about to speak, when I realized something I hadn't noticed before. Maybe I missed it due to all the clutter, but this room was in noticeably worse condition than the others. The walls had black stains on them. The wood in the window frame was blackened and seemingly shattered, far more brittle than those of other apartments. It almost seemed like this specific apartment survived a series of accidents, but was still somehow standing. So why was this the only room left occupied?
Wash your cigarette.
The broken old man shuffled past once again, and this time I got a quick spray in the face. The powerful odor assaulted my nostrils. The smell of the scented water was off. It was too potent, too abrasive. It almost had a toxic fragrance to it. It made me want to cough to get it out of my nose and throat.
Wash your cigarette.
An icy shiver ran through me as I made a sudden realization. Guys, we need to go now, I said. I didn't wait for Sarah or David to respond. I made for the door and ran until I reached my bike.
Hey, what's going on?
David called out as midway through the courtyard. Why'd you ditch us? Sarah asked. They'd both caught up to me and were mounting their bikes slightly out of breath. I didn't answer them. We rode the trail we entered through in silence. After only about a half an hour of riding, we stumbled upon some hikers, both Swedish. They spoke impeccable English, which was good because I wasn't in the mood for talking, and Sarah was eager to take over so we could find our way back to the hostel. It wasn't until later that evening when we were back at the hostel that Sarah insisted that I tell them what had freaked me out. What's going on? Ever since we were at that creepy old guy's house, you've been acting really weird. I didn't want to tell them, because I was hoping that if I kept it to myself, then maybe the realization I made would somehow be less real. Maybe if I didn't say it out loud, then I could believe that it hadn't really happened. But it had. Remaining silent about it wouldn't change it. I sighed. You know what the guy kept repeating. Yeah, you told us it means I'm short 4 people. That can't be what's bothering you, though. That's not what he was saying. I heard it wrong, I replied. You see, the thing about Mandarin is the tones make all the difference. For example, if you hear ga ga, could mean older brother, or each and every, depending on what tones are used. What I thought was, I'm missing 4 people, wasn't that at all. It wasn't until I understood what he had actually sprayed me with that I realized I'd been hearing the tones wrong. He wasn't sprinkling water all over his apartment. He was sprinkling kerosene. And he wasn't saying, I'm missing 4 people. What he was really saying was, I burned everyone. Some people call me a hero. I can't disagree with them, because it's actually kinda true. Believe it or not, I saved a drowning man, pulled a girl from a burning building, and I even saved a dog from being swept away by a nasty flood. My friends thought I was crazy, but I thought I was just exercising my humanity. That, and I was kind of an adrenaline junkie. It was my guilty pleasure. I've been skydiving and bungee jumping on more than one occasion. I've jumped off the ledge of a huge waterfall, hoping that I didn't hit shallow water. Got a couple of scars to show for my endeavors. Don't really do the adventurous things that I used to anymore. Not after what happened. About 7 years ago, a couple of friends and I were just heading out from a New Year's party. It was freezing outside and we had to walk 6 blocks to get back to our dorms. We all started walking, dreading the next 20 minutes or so of minus 20-degree weather.
Hey, wait a minute.
Jared said in his drunken stammer.
It'd be faster if we cut through the park.
We all took a moment to think about it. The city made it a point to close the park down for some reason. Something about there being too many hazards, like falling trees or people drowning in the pond. Michelle cringed at the thought of walking through a knockoff cemetery. Jared, Elisa, and I chuckled at her. The cold wind blew and stung my cheeks. It'd save us an extra 18 minutes, so we decided to go through the park. We quickly made our way to the entrance, hopped the gate, and started walking. It was quite beautiful at 2 a.m. The light from the moon glistened off of the frost that clung to the tree branches. I remembered walking through this park with my parents as a child. Walking by the pond in the summertime to see tourists in their rented boats, enjoying the day, I was kind of excited to see what the pond would look like in the moonlight. It had been so long since I'd seen it, let alone in the middle of winter, and in the dead of night. It would have been a very peaceful walk if Michelle and Jared weren't rambling on about who could drink more and not puke all over everybody. Since Elisa and I were the 2 most sober people of the group, we held them up and made sure they didn't slip on the path and crack their heads open. We approached the pond, and it looked absolutely stunning in the moonlight, even better than I remembered. We all stopped to take in the beautiful view when Michelle noticed something. "What the hell is that?" she shouted, pointing to something out on the ice. We all looked closely and saw something that I'm pretty sure made all our hearts jump into our throats. A little girl stuck out on the frozen wasteland. In a panic, we immediately ran towards the water's edge, cell phones at the ready. Lisa was the first to get anybody on the line. She frantically told the officer what was going on. All the while, the girl was just standing there, not moving, not shouting out for help. "Are you okay?" I shouted, cupping my hands around my mouth to amplify my voice. She still stood there, in silence. While we panicked on the shoreline, I heard something faint but noticeable. I told everyone to be quiet and listen. I cupped my ear with my hand and listened in the direction of the girl. I couldn't quite make out what the sound was. Then it hit me. "The ice is breaking," I said. "Someone has to go out there and get her now." My friends paced back and forth, wondering what to do now. They weren't going to act on it, I was. I took a couple of deep breaths, braced myself, and then cautiously stepped out onto the ice. My trio of friends stopped pacing and saw that I was going out onto the pond.
"What the hell do you think you're doing?"
Jared asked in a somewhat shocked manner. "Don't go out there, please. Just wait until the police get here." Lisa beckoned, but I couldn't wait. If I did, she would fall through. The adrenaline was really flowing now. I couldn't help but smile just a little bit and let out a nervous chuckle. I tried to walk as fast as I could, but it seemed like I wasn't going fast enough. I tried to keep calm and proceeded to step cautiously. My eyes were fixated on the ice below my feet. "Wow, you really are the crazy bastard, aren't you?" I muttered under my breath. I heard it crack again. The goofy grin I wore suddenly vanished. I stopped for a second, only to notice that the ice wasn't cracking below me. I sped up just a little bit more, still watching the ice, making sure I didn't make it crack in the process. As I got closer, I looked up and saw the girl with a little more definition. She was so pale, almost as white as the snow. I thought maybe it was a trick of the light from the moon, but it looked like she was shining. It looked like she was covered with ice or frost or something. I questioned whether or not if she was even alive at this point. But then, how else would she be standing on the ice? I asked myself. Just then, she let out a noise. Something that was barely audible, but nonetheless, a noise. I tore off my jacket and extended the warm article of clothing, hoping she would take it. "Don't worry, sweetie, everything's gonna be all right," I said reassuringly. I was almost close enough to put the jacket on her, and that's when I noticed something that made me stop dead in my tracks. She wasn't standing on the ice. There was a patch of ice that I failed to see before, right behind her that was broken. There was something protruding from the frigid water holding her up. This pale, gray, spiked tentacle. My eyes widened as it squeezed her. That's when I came to the realization that it wasn't the ice that was about to break. When I heard her ribs snap and a wet gurgle escape her mouth as it squeezed her. Blood dripped from her mouth and from the wounds that the spikes had made in her torso. I looked down at the gaping hole in the ice. To this day, I still don't know what the hell I saw. It was this pale, gray thing, covered head to toe with pitch black veins and jagged spikes covered its entire body. It had these huge crimson eyes bordered in black, and when it smiled, I saw 2 sets of rotted yellow fangs. I dropped my jacket. I could hear my heart pounding louder and louder. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't allow me. The corpse of the young girl was suddenly pulled through the hole that the creature had made, and I saw it swim off. My eyes darted back and forth across the ice, wondering where it went. It didn't even dawn on me that my friends were halfway across the ice when I saw them making their way toward me. I tried to yell at them. I tried to tell them to run, but all that came out was this pathetic whimper. They called my name, pleading that I hurry and come to the shore with them before I fall through the ice too. I pushed past my fear and made my feet move. I ran as fast as I could, trying not to slip on the ice. "Run! Get the hell off the ice!" I warned them. They extended their hands to me and started walking my way again.
"Come on, hurry up!"
Jared yelled back. "Just go! Just go! Get off the ice now!" I hollered back, desperately pleading for them to run. Just then, I felt cold water and a jagged edge at my ankle. I fell and bumped my head on the cold surface. Before I knew it, I was being pulled into the icy depths of the pond. When my body was submerged in the water, it felt like 1,000 daggers cutting into my skin. When the water hit my eyes, I thought the liquid inside was gonna freeze. I immediately closed them. I tried not to scream from the pain and to conserve my air. Then I felt a tentacle cut into my ankle, and another tentacle reach around my shoulder and squeeze. It kept pulling and pulling, dislocated my shoulder. Couldn't do it anymore. I screamed, letting out almost all of my air. I thrashed, trying to break free. It only caused its spikes to cut deeper, allowing the frigid water to freeze my bloodstream even faster. I felt the warm tears behind my eyelids and the burning in my lungs. I tried to scream one last time, but it started choking me with its tentacle. The spikes tore into my throat. I opened my eyes again, and I saw it. Those red eyes looked even more menacing now that it was up close. It wore a sinister smile as it licked my face. Started to feel lightheaded. This was the end. No, I thought to myself. I'm not dying like this. I pushed past the pain in my shoulder, raised my hands to its mouth, and started widening its jaw. It squirmed, trying to shake me. I felt the tentacles loosen and its teeth cut into my hands. I looked up and saw 3 hands submerged into the water. I was so exhausted by that point, but I had to keep fighting. I kicked, I squirmed, and I did what I had to in order to free myself. I used more force on its jaw, and I felt it crack. It let out this god-awful screech, let me go, and swam off into the cold darkness below. I could feel the water start to enter my lungs. Tried to swim to the surface, but I was just so tired. I was barely able to extend my hand towards my friends. The last thing I remember seeing was the light of the moon before everything went dark. I awoke the next morning to the beeping of a heart monitor. I was in the hospital. I was covered with the thickest, warmest blankets ever. I tried to move, but when I did, pain shot through my entire body. My head, shoulder, throat, ankle, everything was just throbbing from the pain. My friends walked into the room, saw that I was awake, and rushed over. They told me that they were able to grab a hold of me, pulled me from the water, and rushed me to the hospital. Then they bombarded me with questions pertaining to what pulled me into the water. "Trust me," I said, very weakly. "You don't want to know." "Well, are you going to tell the cops what happened?" Michelle asked. Decided to just tell the police that I was drunk. Felt like doing something adventurous. Because let's face it, would they seriously believe me if I told some water monster lured me out there and tried to kill me? Yeah, given the right state of mind, I wouldn't fall for it either. Needless to say, I don't partake in any more heroic acts. Also haven't been anywhere near water since. Obtained a phobia of it, as you can well imagine. After college, my friends and I went our separate ways, did our own things. I have a family now, and so does Elisa. Get together sometimes for play dates and reminisce about old times. Some parts are left out. It doesn't really matter, though. I still have nightmares about that night. That thing under the ice, its crimson eyes. I always tell myself that it happened a long time ago, and I try to put it behind me. Usually helps. Up until 2 weeks ago, Lisa had taken her boys, my son and my daughter, ice skating. She took them to her late father's house by the lake. It was just them there. When she brought them home, my son said something that sent a chill up my spine. He said that he saw a very pale girl standing on the ice, and by her feet was a pale gray bump with 2 red dots.
Edit. The following testimony was recently sent to me from an old friend. I haven't heard back from him. I hope he's okay.
As you know, I was in training to be a coroner. My education was almost complete, and I had been working a paid internship with a well-known medical examiner in the Washington, D.C. area. All that changed a few hours ago when I was fired from the office for refusing to participate in what I believed to be a cover-up. Even though they warned me about consequences for leaking any information about this case, my conscience wouldn't be clear if I kept quiet. This is something people need to know. A few days ago, we received a call from the Metro Police about a possible body discovered on the Red Line. Since working here, we've responded to a few calls in the subway system. The first time, it was a woman who tripped over someone's rolling suitcase while trying to pass by on the escalators. She ended up with a broken neck. Twice, we went out there for a heart attack, once for a late-night mugging that went bad. Poor guy was stabbed repeatedly in the stomach, even though he handed over his watch and wallet like the mugger requested. So far, I haven't seen anything especially gory, and it was a bit of a letdown when the dispatch officer said the man was found just sitting on the train. Is it wrong that I've been looking forward to a call about someone either jumping or being pushed in front of a train? The interesting thing is the wording of the dispatch request. Possible body. If the word possible is in front of a body, maybe it's the paramedics that should be responding and not the coroner's office. When we arrived, the paramedics actually were on the scene, so we figured it was just a miscommunication and we were called out prematurely. Police tape blocked off the whole entire station platform. From our view at the top of the escalators, we could tell something wasn't right. The paramedics stood outside the door to the train car, and they weren't actually doing anything except arguing and pointing at a body slumped up against a window inside. We could have left, but since it was a slow evening, we decided to take a look anyway just to see what was going on. As we approached, I overheard some of the conversation between the 2 paramedics.
He's dead, right?
Said the older of the 2.
Dead people don't do that.
Do what? I thought. Once they saw us, they quickly agreed that the man was dead and promptly left the scene to us. Clearly this wasn't a call they wanted to handle. I can understand that. The police weren't much help either. I chatted with the officers on the scene while the doc went in to take a look at the man on the train. One of the detectives commented that there weren't any clear signs of foul play. The witnesses all claimed the guy just sat down like everyone else, and then he stopped breathing. Natural causes, I thought. Seemed like a pretty cut and dry case, but when I looked over my shoulder at the doc, he seemed confused.
Look at this,
he said to me as I walked into the train. As I approached, it seemed like the man was just napping like a lot of the other train riders do when they know their stop won't be coming up for a while. Look at what? I asked.
His eyes.
The man's head was forward with his chin to his chest, so that I had to kneel down to get a good look at his face. As I'm doing this, the doc is talking out loud like he tends to do, just going over his mental checklist.
Not breathing, no pulse. His skin is cold to the touch. Approximate time of death, 6 to 8 hours ago.
I'm in the aisle of the train, trying to make do with a pin flashlight since the dim lighting on the train wasn't helping things much. The man's eyes were open, and they seemed to be staring at me. It's not uncommon, so I lean in closer, hoping to figure out what it is the doc wanted me to see, so that I don't look like an idiot. But then, he blinked. I jumped back as quick as a mongoose would jump away from a cobra. "What the fuck?" I tried to say.
Exactly,
The doc said. "Gotta be just a muscle spasm, right?"
you would think.
He says.
But watch this.
He grabs the guy by the hair and pulls his head back. With his other hand, he waves a finger in front of the man's open eyes, which then began to follow along as the doc moves his finger left and right. Then the man looked at me and blinked again. "Have you ever seen anything like this before?" I ask.
Nope.
"And he's dead?"
As a doornail.
We let the officer in charge know that we couldn't determine the cause of death on sight. A full autopsy would be needed to perform to make any kind of determination. She made a note in the report that this body had a tendency to follow you with its eyes and occasionally blink. Off the record, she told me the whole case bothered her. The man, she said, didn't have any identification, credit cards, watch, jewelry, a phone, or even money. All they found on him was a train ticket and a napkin. Once we had him back at the office, we changed into our examination coveralls. I was asked to deal with his clothing. The man watched me the whole time as I stripped off his business suit. He even winked at me once. Also, a few odd things were noted about the clothing. First, he wasn't wearing any undergarments. Normally people wear a t-shirt, boxers or briefs, and socks. This guy wore none of those things. For some reason, he had on 2 belts, one over the other. The doc switched on his tape recorder and then turned on the buzzsaw. I watched as he performed the Y incision, and I made a mental note of his perfect technique so that I could try and do it better next time. I'm telling you, the doc is a real artist. Next came the enjoyable cracking sound as the rib cage was pried open. All the while this was happening, the man's eyes watched us. I could almost swear he was smiling too. Over the next hour, the doc made notes as he did the exam. He handed me each organ to be weighed and cataloged. There was nothing strange or out of the ordinary about any of the internal organs.
Okay,
The doc said.
let's take a look inside his head. I want to see what's causing the eye movement.
Listen, do you mind if we tape the eyes shut first? I'm trying to remain as professional as I can, but the constant blinking is unnerving me. Doc didn't mind, so I took some suture tape and worked up the courage to manually close the guy's eyelids and tape them down. Immediately they started moving fast. His whole face was convulsing and contorting itself, trying to break free of the tape.
I don't think he likes that,
The doc said, and then he removed the tape from the man's eyes. The violent motion stopped right away, and he winked at the doc. "This isn't natural," I said.
There's a scientific reason for everything. It's our job to find it.
The doc replied. But he actually fought to get the tape off of his eyes.
I guess he wants to watch. Now, do you want to remove the skull, or should I?
I'm too shaken to handle the equipment, so I watch as the doc works the saw around the man's skull. The bastard is smiling. I'm sure of it. He's staring at me and blinking his left eye, then his right eye back and forth. I hear the familiar popping sound caused by the top of a skull being pulled off.
Whoa. Okay.
The doc says. What is it? I ask as I'm walking around to see what he's seeing. Man's eyes follow me, of course.
I think I might have to call this one in.
Dear God. The brain was missing. Doc? I ask.
Not now. Pack up and go home. I'll finish cleaning this up.
He's saying this as he's already dialing a number on the phone. But
just go. I'll call you later.
It isn't a request. I know when to shut up and listen. I make way to the door, knowing that the man is still staring at me.
And don't say anything to anyone.
The doc never called me back. Each time I tried to reach him, it went to voicemail. I tried to go back the next day. Security wouldn't let me in the building. They said I was to await further instructions while on paid leave. That was 4 days ago. This morning, I hear a knock at my door. It's a man who said he's with the medical examiner's officer, but he looks as if he's with the CIA, FBI, NSA, or some other 3-letter agency. He asks if he could come in to talk. I open the door to let him in, and as I do, I notice 2 other similarly dressed men sitting in a black Suburban across the street. The folder he hands me is a case file for the John Doe that was found on the train. All of the notes about the eye movement and the blinking were removed. There was no mention of anything out of the ordinary, let alone a missing brain. It's already got the doc's signature on it, and this man is asking for me to sign it as well. I try to tell him the file's wrong, but he holds up a hand to stop me from speaking.
This is how it happened. Sign it,
he said. I ask about the doc. I want to know why I haven't heard from him. He says the doc has been let go. The way he says it made me think the worst. I refuse to sign it and ask to speak to the director of the medical examiner's office. The man informs me that would be impossible and I'm to be fired. But fired isn't the word he used. He used terminated. He leaves when I ask him to go, but he warns me that mentioning this to anyone would have serious consequences. As soon as the door closed behind him, I packed a bag and took off. I saw that a black Suburban was parked at the end of my street, and I might just be paranoid, but I think it pulled out after I did. Just in case I was being followed, I changed directions several times. When I felt safe enough, I pulled into a nearby residential neighborhood and found an open Wi-Fi signal. I think something strange is going on in DC, maybe elsewhere as well. I don't know what it could be, but I feel like the doc and I stumbled onto something we weren't supposed to know about, and now we're in danger. I found the doc's home number online. When I called, it went straight to voicemail. Tried to leave a message for him, but the line went dead once I began talking. If someone is monitoring my phone calls, it's possible my car is bugged too, and they already know exactly where I am. Again, maybe I'm just paranoid or crazy. Maybe there is a completely logical explanation for the Scarecrow Corpse that stares and blinks and winks and smiles. I can't imagine how anything like that could exist or why. I'm scared. Really, really scared. I decided the only thing to do would be to write this and email it out to everyone I know. Hopefully this information will make it to someone. If you've received this and haven't heard back from me by tomorrow, then I'm probably dead, and you'll know what I've written is true.